My next guest is Mandy Froehlich. She passionately encourages educators to create innovative change in their classrooms. A former director of innovation and technology, technology integrator, and teacher, she has experience at many levels of the organizational structure. Her interest lies in reinvigorating and reengaging teachers back into their profession, as well as what's needed to support teachers in their pursuit of innovative and divergent thinking and teaching. Her books, The Fire Within and Reignite the Flames, discusses mental health awareness for educators and educator engagement and disengagement. Her book, Divergent EDU, is based on an organizational structure she developed to address the support necessary for innovative thinking. She also hosts the Teacher's Aide podcast with John Harper. Welcome to the podcast, Mandy.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Well, tell me about a time when you were in the trenches and managed to crawl out.
There are quite a few I could choose from. I typically talk about, the kind of what was the main source of my disengagement from education when I left the classroom. I typically talk about that. And I think that it resonates with people, especially right now, because a lot of people feel like they're in that trench and there's some sort of like anchor holding them in there and they're taken out, but it's just not working. And so it was several years ago, I think maybe 6, 7, 8 years ago now. I don't even know, I'd have to think about it. But I had, I feel like is probably pretty typical issues for an educator. You know, I really loved my kids. I taught 4th and 5th grade, and the second year, I looped with my kids right before I left. And so that second year I looped from 4th to 5th grade. I kept all my same students. They were amazing kids. Like, there is absolutely no reason that I should have felt the way that I did. I loved my students so much. My issues with disengagement was really never about my students. And so what I found was that I was blaming a lot of other people for the way that I felt. Like, I was blaming administration for things that I felt like they were putting a cap on my teacher creativity and autonomy in my classroom. And I was, blaming the everything from other teachers in the building to the community and parents. And I was just so angry all the time. And I usually say about re-engagement, like, when I was at that point and I wanted to leave, some people can leave, like the newer teachers potentially can leave first 5 years because they potentially don't have a family and things like that. I had a family, like, I couldn't leave the profession. And I couldn't find a job that made the same amount of money outside the profession with my degree, because my degree is an education degree and, it's very specific. So when I decided that it was time to re-engage, I had actually already left the classroom. I was in a new district. I was in a new position as a tech integrator. Everything had changed. The scope of my job had changed. The district had changed. Nothing was the same. And I still felt the exact same way. I was still angry. I was still blaming administration for issues. I still didn't want to go to work in the morning. It was like all these same things. And finally one day I kind of sat back and I'm like, this is really about me. This is my issue and I'm the angry one. And, and because everything else had changed, there was nothing that was the same. And it dawned on me that there was no way that I could go from a district to another district, work with people that I actually enjoyed. Like, I enjoyed the people I worked with and yet still be so angry all the time. And so the basis of why I re-engaged, like, it very, very simply came down to, I felt like I deserved to be happy in my job again. And, and I've said it, people say, well, do it for the children. Yeah, that's a great reason to do it too, right? Like that's a fantastic reason to be engaged, is for the children. Do it for your colleagues, do it for the profession, do it because you should. Yes, you should do it for all of those things. But the real reason you should do it is because you deserve to enjoy being in the profession that you chose to go to school for so long. and that your heart was so engaged with at the beginning. And so that's probably my biggest kind of out of the trenches story professionally, is just that very initial point of disengagement.
And that kind of leads into my next question about explain your transition to now, from being director of innovation to what you're working on now and how you're helping educators.
Sure. So again, I left teaching to go into tech integration, and I was once I started the process of re-engaging, I was very happy in that position. It was probably one of my favorite positions I've ever had, because I love supporting educators. I do believe that when we support educators, we are best supporting students. That's kind of one of my core beliefs. And so I really took to this idea of supporting educators. And so I started to re-engage back in, and I started to really like the job I was in, and really make it my own, and took responsibility for my engagement and all of those things. And sort of the next natural step from a tech integrator was a tech director. And when I was a tech integrator, I had a fantastic boss. He was really, really a great director of technology, really encouraged me to, kind of expand and grow my wings and all of those types of things. And so a position came open in a neighboring district for a director of innovation and technology, and I applied for it. It was just sort of the next natural step, I guess, after learning so much of being a tech integrator. So that's how I moved to that. I was a tech director for a few years, and it was a really interesting experience. I learned a lot about myself. I learned that I have strengths in areas that I didn't really understand. Like, for example, I'm really good at taking something that seems to be messy and making it organized and make sense for people.
Okay.
So, I started learning things like that about myself, and I started talking more about, different things that, I've been presenting and consulting and stuff for probably 7 years, kind of part-time. And the opportunity came, or the point came where I sort of had to decide, what was I going to do? Was I going to continue consulting full-time, or, move into consulting full-time, or continue being a tech director? And at a time where a lot of districts are closing down on professional development and conferences that you can go to and things like that, I took a leap of faith into the consulting role full-time, and have been enjoying that for the last year. And it really helps me, again, if my purpose has become to support educators, and it has really helped me hone in on that purpose. So continue to do that like I did in the tech director role, only without having to worry about if the network was up and everything was plugged in, and if people, shut things down and turn them back on and all that kind of stuff. I was able to move away from that and just move into supporting teachers.
And have you felt like you've been needed a lot since the coronavirus started with just district support and just your expertise as having that experience with maybe, some of the issues that they're coming across, at least in the spring, with teaching online?
Yeah, so it's kind of funny. I've been joking, especially lately. I feel like between my expertise in like technology and technology departments and one-to-one rollouts and blended learning and all of that kind of stuff, and then my professional passion of mental health and engagement and those types of things, I've been joking that I've been like professionally bred for pandemics. Like that is my now become my expertise is pandemic learning. So yeah, I've been extraordinarily busy, and it's been, you know, it's good and bad, because I one of the things that I was doing prior to the pandemic was actually helping districts develop online programs.
Mm-hmm.
And so going through the process of being very proactive in developing these special type of, you know, learning platforms for students or modalities for students that they could learn in a different way besides the brick and mortar setting. And so I was working with a lot of districts that when the pandemic hit, it was interesting to see, and I'm so sick of this word, but I'm gonna use it anyway. Interesting to see them pivot from the you know, the online learning, what they were doing in their online learning programs to the pandemic learning, and you know, and some of them had like recognized all of the work we had done in best practices in online learning and continued that. Some of them felt like there was a need to sort of lock down the learning a little bit more, and you know, went away from that, and then what the outcomes of those have been. So it's been super interesting. But yes, I've been busy just because of the things I had been working on prior to pandemics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and now we're seeing, you know, a lot of the districts that are either hybrid or starting out remotely. A lot of them have bought, at least where I live, they bought a platform. A lot of the time, you know, they're shelling out a lot of the CARES Act money to buy these multi-million-dollar platforms. But with the districts that you've worked with in the spring, do you feel like they're more confident about what they're using online for their remote or hybrid learning days now in the fall than what they used in the spring, depending on if they had something, like you said, that was using best practices, or, you know, do they feel more comfortable with something that will engage students more in the fall?
Sure. Yeah, this is kind of a hard question to address, because in addressing it, I'm going to have to sort of take a side on what best practices are, right? And we know that not everybody is doing best practice for various reasons.
Yeah.
Sometimes people don't do best practice because they just simply don't know.
Yeah.
And sometimes people don't do best practice because they don't feel it's right for their district. And what I never want to sound like is, well, if you were doing it right, you would be doing it this way. However, there are some best practices to online learning that have to do more with you know, how you're setting, like what kind of structure you're using for the pedagogy versus, you know, trying to replicate your class online. One of the biggest issues I see right now are the districts who have chosen to have their online students, if they're, you know, whether they're completely online or in a hybrid model, have their online students follow the hour to hour, you know, basically be online all day.
Yeah,
they're following their hour to hour classes.
Instruction.
Yeah, and it's that's been kind of a tough pill to swallow, because that actually goes against all types of online learning and what it's supposed to be. And the struggle I'm seeing right now that I'm not sure was well anticipated is that students are online for their entire day, but then they're also online for their homework. And I know my own kids, you know, have been online for all of their classes, and then they've been sometimes 2-3 hours of homework at night. Well, by the time you're done, you're looking at 8-9 hours on a computer all day, which is, that's a lot for anybody. And as adults, we know how we feel in being on a computer like that all day. And then you're asking children to do the same thing. And so that that live instruction model has been kind of a tough one to watch. And again, you know, understanding that I know that districts are just trying to do the best that they can. But I do think there were some districts who were super, super proactive in what they were doing, and that they did a nice job in providing, professional development for teachers, understanding that what happened in the spring was an emergency, and what happened in the fall could be a little bit better prepared for. So I see districts who are doing the absolute best that they can. And then I see some districts who really, I think, honestly thought things would be returning back to normal by September and didn't do much planning at all. So it's totally across the board. I haven't seen a lot of, I feel like every time I talk to a different district, they're doing something else. They're doing something different, trying something new. And I think everybody, when it comes down to it, is just doing the best that they can.
Yeah, and what's interesting for me is that, like, in the Denver area where I live, everybody's using their own platform, or they're just expanding on the online platform that they already had, because most larger districts already had their e-learning platform. But it's just, like you're saying, they're kind of waiting and seeing how it plays out and how long they might need to be using that. And kids will switch back if they do more days in person in the spring, if kids will switch back because they had to commit to a semester. So yeah, it's interesting. It's one for the books. We'll see how this model affects different learning styles, right?
No doubt.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about your blog, and especially yesterday on so September 8th, yesterday you put out a post about teacher burnout and just kind of your observations in the past, several months as we're starting this school year. And tell me a little bit about how you got your blog started, and kind of, does that build off of a lot of what you've written in your books? And, what are your thoughts as you write those blog posts?
Yeah, so it's my blog's an interesting place for me. I have a lot of people tell me, like, you should try to make money off from it. You should put ads on it. You should do this kind of thing. And I really, really use my blog as a source of reflection for myself. And that's why I have never done any kind of monetizing it or anything like that, because it has been for me like a very public professional journal. And the reflection I've gotten from that has been significant and powerful. And, it's more than I ever would have guessed in the very beginning. And so I feel like if you ever started from the beginning of my blog, you would absolutely see the journey I've taken since starting to re-engage, because starting my blog was actually a big part of that. And I started out talking a lot about innovation and what that means, and supporting teachers in innovative thinking. And one day I put out a blog post about being a teacher with anxiety and depression, or working in education with anxiety and depression. And it went all over the place. And I had people messaging me saying, "Oh my gosh, me too. Thank you so much for putting this out there. I always feel so weird. I never know what to say." And so I started to really dive into that. And my first book touches on mental health issues in education, and tries to bring some awareness to mental health issues in educators, as far as, as a very specific profession that works with children, what does that mean? How do our experiences impact what we do in the classroom? And really kind of brings back around, like, the fact that people can go through trauma and they can actually take what they've learned and use it to help other people. And so it focused on that. And I started to really think about teacher engagement, especially working as a tech integrator and then a tech director, and seeing teachers who are clearly disengaged. And a lot of people would talk constantly about burnout. It's burnout. But there are actually other reasons for teachers to disengage. And if we're constantly talking about burnout and how we come back from that, we may be ignoring demoralization, for example, which is takes a different strategy for bouncing back from that. We might be ignoring the fact that if you get cancer and you're continuing to teach during your treatments, that is That is a personal adversity where you don't have the capacity to put the same amount of energy into your job as you had before. Your emotional and physical capacity is diminished, and that can make you feel disengaged. And so I started to look into those different reasons why there's disengagement. And that's kind of what my third book, Reignite the Flames, is based on, and talks a lot about how I became reengaged, as just to give people some strategies for reengagement. But the blog post came from a place where a couple different things had all happened. For me, it's usually like there's 5 scenarios that happen all at once that bring me to a point where I'm like, oh, this is what's happening right now. Okay. One of them was a friend of mine that had gone through a very difficult time and was struggling to recognize the impact that the adversity had on her. Another one was a teacher friend of mine who spoke about a teacher I used to work with that said, I read Mandy's blogs and I know I'm disengaged and I just can't, like, I'm trying and it's just not, like, some of the stuff's not working, and she's super frustrated with it. And I realized that within my work, I don't really acknowledge how long it actually takes to come back from something like that. That it's not a quick fix, and it's not something where you start blogging for the first week and all of a sudden you're magically engaged, or you start meditating and you're a changed person. Like, that's not how healing works. And we don't often look at disengagement as something that you need to heal from, but it absolutely is, because when it comes down to it, your emotional teacher, everything all of the emotion that you put into teaching has been, for lack of a better term, damaged. And it's something that really needs to be addressed in the form of healing, and healing takes a long time. And if you've ever had to heal from any kind of trauma, that sometimes it feels like 2 steps forward and 1 step back, or sometimes it feels like 1 step forward and 2 steps back. And, it's really about continuing on and working towards being happy.
Yeah, no, I resonate with that. Like, you can sometimes have experiences in environments that you work in, and that can be still with you years later, right? Or
for sure.
Something that you might have experienced during a conflict with a colleague or something, and that's still, it's something it doesn't just go away, like you said.
Right.
So I think that's definitely something I would suggest listeners to read, and Reignite the Flames, to kind of realize how their journey can take them back to being engaged. So I also wanted to talk a little bit about your podcast and why you started it, what kind of people you interview, the Teacher's Aide podcast. So it kind of, in the name, talks about, it helps teachers, right? So kind of what is in the name, and how many episodes are out, and how often do you publish the episodes?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So it's kind of funny. So Teacher's Aide itself has been with the BAM radio network for a really long time. And it was with another gentleman had been doing it. Honestly, I can't think of his name right now. I apologize. But my co-host, John Harper, had picked it up and started doing it because John has this sort of same passion for supporting teachers as I do. And so the way that I came across it is John actually asked me to be a guest on the show. And after he had read the blog post that I mentioned about depression and anxiety in educators. And so I went on the show and we recorded a really long show. It was supposed to be 10 to 15 minutes. And I think it ended up being 45 or something like that. And by the end of it, the Errol from BAM Radio reached out to me and said, hey, we would really we love the chemistry you two have. We really would love you to come on and co-host the show. And I couldn't turn it down. It was just so closely related to my purpose and what I was doing, that it was such a fantastic opportunity. And the BAM Radio people are as well as John Harper, are so much fun to work with. But I don't honestly know how many episodes we've had. I've been doing it for, I think, about 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And we've had people on, I mean, oh my gosh, we've had people on from Dan Pink to, educators that are still like on the boots or on the ground, boots on the ground type people. And we've had just a wide variety of different experiences and things like that. And I've gotten to know some people from the podcast that are just phenomenal people, and it's been a really good experience. So we talk mostly about support, different things like supporting teachers. So we've spoken about mental health. Obviously, we've spoken about we had an episode one time where we talked about calling home, like making it with, I think it was Todd Whitaker for that one. Just like how to call home, like the anxiety you feel when you have to make those phone calls home. And so we try to talk about those little things that just sometimes are assumed to be part of the profession, that just because it's part of the profession doesn't mean it's not something that causes angst. And so we don't release them on a regular basis, unfortunately. I think we typically have maybe one a month. I think that's released. But lately it's been a little bit more because we've been trying to do some of our episodes on racism. And like recently we did one that was, how young is too young to talk about race. And so John is really amazing at picking out concerns that people have and formulating, like, let's talk about this. Like if you think there is an age that's too young to talk about race, let's talk about this. And so that's kind of what our stuff has been on. It's been really great.
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear how, they saw the chemistry that you had as a guest, and then that went on to become you became a co-host on that podcast. So great. I think, we've learned a lot about your journey and, what's led you to help educators today. Out of everything we talked about today on the podcast, what's one thing in particular you'd like listeners to remember?
Yeah, so I think what I'm going to sort of leave listeners with is the idea of resilience. And I started talking about this several years ago because I had been told a lot throughout my lifetime that resilience is about bouncing back to who you were before. If you are resilient, you bounce back to who you were. And I was thinking about it one day, and I've been through a lot of stuff in my life where I've had to quote unquote bounce back, but I was never the person I was before. And had I tried to be that person, I would continue to fail, because the fact of the matter is that when you go through an adversity, you go through something difficult, you go through a pandemic, you go through having to completely change your job and go from, hugging your kindergartners one day to having to teach them online the next for months on end. And you haven't gotten a break over the summer, really, because you're so anxious about what's going to happen in the fall. Like when you go through these things, it changes you. And there are pieces of adversity that come, that, pieces that you get out of adversity that do make you stronger, and that give you, a perspective you didn't have before, and give you tools for your tool belt that you didn't have before. And so resilience isn't about bouncing back to who you were before. Resilience is about recognizing who you are after that adversity and learning to love that person. And when you can do that, that's when you start to accept some of the things that you've gone through as being a part of you, and healing from some of those things. So I think that that's probably what I would leave listeners with.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point to end on, because it's all a journey, right? Life's not a destination but a journey, and everything that happens to us makes us stronger. But like you were talking about a little while ago, those things stay with us.
Mm-hmm.
right? But we can reflect back on those experiences and, as you said, put those tools in the tool belt.
Yeah. And I think it's important, like you said, it's a journey, and it's about understanding that you can love who you are
Mm-hmm.
and still want to get better. You can do both. You can love who you've become and still understand that you have to heal.
Mm-hmm.
It's not an either or. You can do both of those things. And so figuring out how to do that is part of the healing process.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, where can people find you online?
Well, the easiest way to find me is on Twitter at @FroehlichM. And then also my website, you can find me at www.divergentedu.com. Most people can't spell my last name, so Divergent EDU is easier. And then all of my books, The Fire Within, Divergent EDU, and Reignite the Flames can all be found on Barnes & Noble and Amazon. And I think that's just about it.
Well, thank you so much for being on the Out of the Trenches podcast today. Have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.